Welcome into the Hockey Hub. Sophia Jurksztowicz Adam Pellerin here with you guys. I forgot to look up what episode this was, Adam, but we're rolling. We're rolling in the summers.
It's
you have
71. It could be Taylor Hall, 71. Oliver Wahlstrom, I believe, just wore 71 most recently. So there you go.
There you go. Thank you. Welcome to episode 71 of the Hockey Hub. Lots to go over. It's the day before the Bruins presser with their new official head coach, Marco Sturm, 30th in history. We're going to probably be heavy on that, but obviously there's some great playoff hockey that's being played as well. And we have Pete Blackburn for half the show of What Chaos. You guys know him as one of the funniest guys on Twitter, and he's got his own podcast. So, Adam, I think without further ado, he's waiting in the shadows. Let's bring in Pete Blackburn. Second time on our show, dude. Thank you so much for joining us, Pete.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right. Well, like I said, we're going to have you on for about half the show, which is going to be nice for us. Why don't we just start with the news? We had you on, I don't know, a month ago when I think there were 5, 6, 7, 8 prospects, or it was pretty much wide open, the pool for the coaching decision. I remember one of the big topics you and I discussed was if it mattered if this coach had Bruins history or not. You and I were on the same page at the time that we didn't think it really mattered. I've since kind of changed my tune, not because of the Marco Sturm hiring, but just because the more I thought about it, the culture, the way things were going, it would have been nice to have someone with some Bruins history. Where do you stand on that? What do you make of this hiring by the Boston Bruins?
Yeah, I still overall don't really care about the Bruins history element of it. Is it a nice little tag onto it, and will it be a greater story if Marco Sturm is a great coach for the Boston Bruins? Yeah, of course. But I think at the end of the day, you want the best hockey coach for this team in this transition period that you're coming up on. And, from all the people that I've asked about Marco Sturm and what he brings to the table, he sounds like he's a good candidate. And to the Bruins' credit, they're good at hiring coaches. It's just that they're also pretty good at firing coaches. And we find out that those coaches that they fire are good coaches in their next job. And so, I'm not really doubting the Bruins in this process. I just think that, where I looked at their outlook at the beginning of the offseason and who might be available in terms of head coaches, Marco Sturm didn't really make my list of exciting options. He's not a Mike Sullivan. He's not a David Carl, some of these other names that you could throw out there. So it's not really registering as a really exciting move for me, but it could be the right move for this team right now.
Do you think that's sort of a trend in the NHL? By the way, Pete, what's up, man? It's been a minute. It's been a minute. I think the last time I saw you, we were talking baseball on your old podcast you used to do back in the day, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, and now I have not watched baseball in 2 years, so it's been a long time, pal.
There you go. You don't have to, which is great, right? But in terms of the head coach, landscape in the National Hockey League, and I think you've seen this, more recently, where you're seeing head coaches get hired that don't necessarily have NHL head coaching experience, right? Spencer Carberry is sort of the poster child for that in Washington. You just had Dan Hughes in Pittsburgh hired, now Marco Sturm. Why do you think that's become a trend in the National Hockey League?
I think part of the reason is because it's a players' league now. It's just, that's pretty undeniable at this point. You need to be able to connect with your players. And, when I asked about Marco Sturm, the thing that kept coming up over and over and over again, whether it was former players or guys that have played for him or guys that have worked under him or above him, the one thing that keeps coming up is that he's a great communicator and that his players love him. And so I think that's going to be a big key, and it's probably a big reason why that the Bruins decided to land on him. And so I think when you look at a lot of these young coaches like a Carberry, and one of the names that you didn't mention was Marty St. Louis, who's just basically plucked off the street to go coach the Montreal Canadiens, has been awesome in unlocking some of their players. The players love him, but I think that only gets you so far. You also have to be a good coach. You have to know your system. You have to know the X's and O's, and you have to be able to make adjustments on the fly. So I think it's part of a requirement at this point in time in today's league, where it's a players' league, but it's not the only requirement, that's for sure.
You talked about, exciting versus non-exciting names, and I totally agree with you. I wasn't around. I was still in Toronto when Bruce Cassidy was hired by the Boston Bruins as their full-time head coach, and then obviously I was here for the Jim Montgomery news. I mean, Jim Montgomery wasn't the most exciting name to me when I heard. I was like, oh, okay, all right. I don't know how you felt about the time when Bruce Cassidy was hired, but I'm assuming just because of how it happened through the system, it also wasn't like a blockbuster move. But then both of them turns out to be unbelievable coaches. Is that the Bruins system, or would they have gotten their shot somewhere else and done the same thing, or do you think that has something to do with coaching for the Boston Bruins from kind of going from, I wouldn't say nameless, but guys with that don't have big names that now all of a sudden are very desirable in the market?
No, I think you have to identify that, like, the front office and the people in charge of hiring these coaches kind of know what to do in the process. Like, they've hired good coaches, and again, it's been proven by the fact that they've also fired them, and those coaches have carried that immediate success elsewhere. Bruce Cassidy wins the Stanley Cup in Vegas. Jim Montgomery turns the Blues around, turns them into a playoff team this year. I think that was kind of unexpected for him in a pretty short amount of time. So, like, these are good coaches. It's not the Bruins effect. I think it's coaches bringing that experience and bringing the right mentality to this group. Unfortunately, it seems like for the past couple of guys, there's been a pretty solid expiration date on it. Whether you want to say that it was fair or unfair, like, when they were fired, I think that regardless of the success that they had here in Boston, something kind of went missing along the way, and they felt like they couldn't move past that. Hopefully with Marco Sturm, it doesn't expire as quickly, and hopefully it doesn't kind of burn out the way that it did with the past two guys. But, I don't really doubt what their abilities are in terms of identifying the right coach for the group that they have in front of them.
The Bruins were the last team to hire a head coach this offseason, and then the news comes down that Pete DeBoer gets fired from Dallas like a day later. Do you think the Stars are waiting for Pittsburgh and Boston to hire their coaches before they fired DeBoer, or do you think that just happened to be coincidence? And the second part of that question, do you think the Bruins had any interest in DeBoer? Do you think that maybe part of that was the holdup?
The Stars may have done Pete DeBoer dirty. If so, that is one hell of a story. Because if you dislike your coach so much that you are waiting for the last coaching vacancy to be filled before you fire him, oh boy, there's some animosity there. As far as the Bruins and Pete DeBoer, there's one reason that I look at that and say it probably shouldn't work or won't work, or I wouldn't take a chance on it. And it's Jeremy Swayman. Like, Pete DeBoer, his reputation at this point is a guy who burns his goalies eventually. And you can, I'm not talking about the pull in Game 5 with Jake Ottinger. The pull is the pull, and I'm fine with it. It's the throwing him under the bus after the fact that I think is what ultimately got Pete DeBoer fired. The players didn't like it. Jake Ottinger didn't like it. I assume the front office didn't like it. That cost him a job. But he also did the same thing with Marc-Andre Fleury in Vegas. And when you're talking about the Bruins and their relationship with Jeremy Swayman, which is already maybe strained at this point, like, you're looking to repair that relationship. You're looking to build up Jeremy Swayman. I don't know if bringing in a coach whose reputation is throwing his goaltenders under the bus at the first given opportunity as the right fit for the Boston Bruins right now. And yes, he's a great coach. He gets to the Western Conference Final in 5 out of the last 6 years. That's a really, really good coach with good experience, but he might not be the right coach for this team right now.
You talked about, I want to take this conversation in so many different directions because I want to bring in social media to the conversation. But first with the Pete DeBoer thing, and just, you mentioned how the league is changing and it's a players' league now. Back in the day, so to speak, you had a couple writers and you had TV covering, but you didn't have social media. The players didn't really have a voice outside of what they were able to tell reporters, and then the reporters would either report it or not. Are coaches losing more power, so to speak? Because if that happened 20 years ago, everyone knows what happened with Patrick Roy, but he made it very, very obvious in the game. But if that happened 20 or 25 years ago and there isn't that much noise around it, are we having the same conversation today? Or do coaches have to be more careful now because you get this noise, so to speak, whether management tries to ignore it or not, but online, like noise, and then noise from, or not noise, I'll call it voices from the players and the room, that it's just spreading a lot faster. Would that have happened 25 years ago? Or do coaches have to be more careful about public outcry from either the room and the fans, or should that not matter?
No, I think you used two of the right words there. Players have more of a voice in the room, and that voice in the room creates more noise outside of the room. And I think that both things happened in this case with Pete DeBoer, is that he throws his goaltender under the bus after that series, and during the exit interviews, during the post the cleanup days and things like that, it sounds like the players had a problem with the way that he handled things, and they used their voice to create noise, and ultimately that noise cost Pete DeBoer a job, or at least plays into the fact that he loses his job. So, like, I mean, a similar thing kind of happened with the Bruins with Bruce Cassidy. Is after the exit interviews, it sounded like the players didn't exactly enjoy their experience with Bruce Cassidy. That ultimately plays into the fact why he loses a job despite success on the ice. And so, yeah, like, it's definitely a different league at this point, and players have more of a voice. They are able to create more noise in the media, in the headline cycle, and it's almost an impossible thing to ignore. Depending on who's in charge of a team and who's running a team, you can choose to look past it or say that we're not going to be influenced by this noise that the players are creating. But we're seeing more and more that they are influenced by the voices in the room, and they are influenced by the noise that creates. And, you know, it does sometimes cost a guy a job.
Pete, getting back to the Bruins, the Marco Sturm hire. Obviously, this is a big offseason for the Bruins. It starts later this month with the draft, the number 7 overall pick. They have a lot of cap space in terms of, you know, who they might pursue in free agency, maybe some trades mixed in there. But, you know, when training camp rolls around, you know, what do you want to see out of Sturm? Because, you know, I remember when Jim Montgomery got fired from, you know, his position in November, and Joe Sacco takes over. And, you know, the Bruins sort of got back to their identity a little bit. They were tough to play against. The defense was much better. Goaltending was starting to come around a little bit at that point. Sort of fell off, obviously, and then fell off completely once the calendar turned to 2025. Do you want to see the Bruins sort of get back to that identity? Is that important to establish right out of the gate?
Yeah, I think the identity factor is very important. This past year, the 82 game sample that we got was so incredibly frustrating, and not just because there were a ton of losses, but the way that those losses looked. I mean, you came undone so often at the end of games, and it was just incredibly frustrating, and it felt like things didn't change from month to month throughout the season. It didn't feel like there was a lot of progression. And obviously at the trade deadline, you strip away a lot of the pieces, and so you take some steps backwards there. But there was no excuse for how repetitive and consistently they blew games, and how out of character they looked. Like, they would score a goal and then immediately get scored on, or, you know, they'd carry a lead into the final few minutes of a game and completely implode and come apart at the seams. And to me, like, that kind of stuff does start in the locker room, in intermission. Like, the head coach has to be able to keep his team together when they're kind of regrouping, locking in, and settling in. And unfortunately, you know, under Joe Sacco, there was a lot of just coming undone when they really needed to lock in. And so, you know, for the culture, I think that, you know, you can say whatever you want to say about the culture. I think that tends to follow winning. But to win, I think that this team needs to be better in high pressure moments. And that would be one of the highest things that I'm looking at under Marco Sturm is, what does this team look like when the pressure is at the highest? Because under Joe Sacco, and to a certain extent Jim Montgomery at the end of his tenure, this team just came completely undone at the seams.
Yeah, and the training camp was one of the lack thereof of a really good training camp was one of the criticisms that was talked about and circulated about how it, obviously with the Jeremy Swayman situation, but just in general, wasn't up to par. And then that's going to really matter just to set the tone this early. That being said, we know, like you said, the Bruins have hired and fired some really good coaches. And I don't want to look ahead already to a couple years, but how long do you think Marco Sturm's runway is from turning the culture around or, you know, like you said, just the calmness of not blowing leads or even coming from behind when you're down a couple goals, which when I started in 2019, 2020, that season, and everyone knows I came from the Toronto Maple Leafs, which have been a disaster for a really long time, I was blown away with just the composure and the calmness that I would see when the Bruins were down 2. It was almost as if you just knew they would come back. Like, I know it didn't happen every time, but it was like, okay, down 2 in the third, don't worry, we'll at least tie it or make it a game. Didn't see that this year. How much of a runway are we giving Marco Sturm before we're like, ooh, I don't know if this is going well as a fan, not from Sweeney, but as a fan?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's an impossible question to answer right now, just because Marco Sturm hasn't coached in the NHL yet. I don't want to slap an expiration date on a guy that
Right.
we don't really know what we're getting from him. I think he has to learn in this role as well. But also a big part of the reason why it's pretty impossible to do that is we don't know what Marco Sturm's team is going to look like at this point. Like, this is going to be a really important offseason for the Bruins. And if they head into next year with a team that looks a lot like what they have right now, I think we'll all consider that a failure on the front office's part and probably won't exactly hold it against Marco Sturm if things don't really go well. But again, like it really does depend on what it looks like in front of you as it's happening, because we could be talking a year from now and Marco Sturm is out of this job. And we're saying, yeah, it needed to happen based off of what we saw over the last 82 games. That was a disaster. That stunk. They had a good offseason or they didn't have a good offseason. It doesn't matter. That was completely unpalatable. It seems like this isn't the right guy for us. So it could be a year. It could be 2 years. It could be 5 years. It could be 10 years. Who knows? Like, I think right now there's just so much uncertainty around this whole team, this whole organization, that it's really impossible to project anything, because they have somewhat of a blank canvas to work with, because that's the position that they put themselves in this past season by hitting a little bit of a reset button.
So you have a coach with no NHL experience at the helm. How important is it for this coaching staff to have some experience in that regard, right? Because, you watch games and then all of a sudden you say, oh man, I didn't know he was on the bench, right? It could be a longtime NHL coach, Claude Julien, right, on the bench in St. Louis with Jim Montgomery, which is kind of strange. How important is it for the staff to have some NHL head coaching experience for Sturm to maybe lean on?
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty important. Like, you want to have at least somebody who's been in those shoes before, and I don't know who necessarily that would be, but like and to a certain extent too, like Marco Sturm does have head coaching experience, just not at the NHL level, so like he has some of that experience. But yeah, I think that like when you're talking about a staff, the staff is always important. I think that's often a very overlooked element of success behind the bench on an NHL team. Is like I go back to a couple of years ago in New Jersey when we were talking about like Lindy Ruff and his experience there, and Andrew Burnett being under him and how good the Devils were with that system. And then Andrew Burnett leaves the Devils, takes another job, and it looks like Lindy Ruff is coaching a completely different team, even though the roster is kind of the same next year. Like, I think assistants have a really, really big hand into what a team is doing as an organization and as a club. So I think it's important for Marco Sturm to be able to pick his guys. I think it's important for there to be some experience there and maybe fill the gaps where he isn't really super well versed in. So yeah, I think it'll be important to keep a close eye on what his staff looks like.
Yeah, I can't wait to, like you said, a lot of question marks. There's so much to be filled in still before we really understand what we're working with ahead of September and training camp. Pete, we're going to send it to a quick break, pay some bills, and we'll be right back to talk Brad Marchand and more after this.
All right, welcome back to Hockey Hub. Adam Pellerin, Sophia Jurksztowicz, joined by Pete Blackburn. We really appreciate Pete being on with us. We talked a lot about the Marco Sturm hiring in the first segment of the show. Let's move on to the Stanley Cup Final. And, Pete, I'm usually a victim of recency bias, and, I admit that, because watching the first two games of this Cup Final, it's like, man, this is the greatest Cup Final I've ever seen, or at least start to it. What are your thoughts on the first two games of the series?
Yeah, it's been unbelievable. I think anybody who may have had like a fatigue or an aversion to a rematch, it's got to be quieted at this point, right? Because the first two games have been unbelievable. And, you can look back on last year and say that it went 7 games, but ultimately, like, if you look back, a lot of those 7 games were multi-goal games. It wasn't as close on a game-to-game basis as the first 2 games have been this year. And yeah, the Oilers have been the better team for like a bigger part of this series, but ultimately, like, you get an overtime game, a double overtime game, and then we're back to square one. It's a best of 5 at this point. And so I don't think you could really ask for too much more from the first 2 games here, at least from an entertainment standpoint. And then game 2, you also had the nastiness start to come to the front. Like, this is pure entertainment. I think that we could be staring down the barrel of the best Stanley Cup Final matchup since the Bruins faced the Canucks in 2011. So that really excites me.
Dude, it's been so fun to watch, as you said, from all aspects. Even the players have said so to the media a couple of times, saying, like, I don't think you could be asking for anything more. I think they're feeling the intensity as everyone does in a final, but it just seems a bit extra special with the rematch. How many more OTs do you think we're seeing in this series?
I mean, at this rate, we're going to get 3 OTs tonight in Game 3. We're going to get 4 in Game 4, and so on and so on. And at this point, like, it might be just the last team standing. Honestly, in Game 2, I said at the beginning of the game, I was asked, is this a must-win game for Florida? And I said, absolutely not. Like, both of these teams are teams that just do not have any quit in them. They're never out of games, and I think we've seen that throughout these playoffs and throughout this series so far. But the longer that game went on, I just kept thinking to myself, Florida better get this one, because if you lose 2 overtime games and you basically played an entire extra game through, double overtime and then overtime, if you don't get one of those and you're an older team with a guy like Brad Marchand, who's like, no disrespect to Brad, I love him. He's got a little mileage on those legs. Like, they've got older players. You want to get at least one of those games. So, it could just be wearing down players as the series goes along, and last team standing might win here.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy too, right? Because Marshy scored, the go-ahead goal in regulation, and then 40-year-old Corey Perry scored the game-time goal, and then double overtime. It's Marshy again, who's pushing 40, 37 years old. Let's talk about Brad Marchand. I mean, when he was traded to Florida, everybody around here is like, how can you trade Brad Marchand to the Florida Panthers? That's so strange to see him in a Panthers sweater after everything that's happened between the Bruins and Panthers over the years, and the Sam Bennett stuff from last playoff. But he's a perfect fit there. He has been just everything the Panthers could ask for and more.
Yeah, I never doubted that. Like, I didn't like the trade. I didn't like the return, but there was no doubt in my mind that he was going to absolutely click in Florida, because they play like a prison yard team. And of course, like, that's why we all love Brad Marchand. That's why everybody else hated Brad Marchand. He is one of those guys that, like, if he plays for your team, you absolutely love him. And if he's especially playing for the Florida Panthers, who already fit that mold, he is going to click. Like, it's going to be unbelievable and seamless. And it has been. So, as a fan, it's been a weird experience, because part of me still wants Brad Marchand's success to be limited to the Bruins, and I want him to always be propped up as a Bruin. But at the same time, it's very cool to be able to watch him still and on this stage, and him still be able to do the Brad Marchand things that we came to love him for. So, it's been bittersweet for sure. And I saw Sarah Sivian say this after Game 2, and I agree with her. It feels like the Panthers owe the Bruins an extra first-round draft pick at this point, based off of Brad Marchand's contributions. I just wish that they had gotten more for him, because he's clearly unlocked something with that third line in Florida, and they are so lucky to have him.
Oh my gosh, it really has been the perfect fit for them. I agree with Sarah Sivian's tweet, and I'm still hoping that if Brad hoists the cup, he'll maybe come back and finish his career in Boston, but obviously we'll wait and see. That being said, some of the criticism that was floating around was that Brad wanted more than at 37 in terms of term and in terms of money you would normally pay a 37-year-old. Now, with what he's showing and shown, do you think he has earned that, whatever those numbers were? Do you think he has earned that from any team, not just the Boston Bruins? And I just want to throw in there, I think a lot of people are forgetting that he is absolutely fighting for a spot on the Canadian men's Olympic roster as well. Like, that was not a shoo-in, especially with his age. And I know he's dying to play because of COVID and because of the negotiations back in the day with the Olympics. So that, he's probably not thinking about that now, but he's so motivated to make sure that Team Canada has him on that team. So I think, at least for the first half of the season, wherever he signs, not saying that it would taper off after that, but he'll be like he is now, like a dog on a bone, as Jack Edwards used to say. So with what you've seen, is he earning that max money, or that money that he was looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to come down to term and dollar amount, and that can be more unpalatable. But like, if we're talking about Sam Bennett being a $10 million player over a 7-year deal, like, Brad Marchand's got to be worth like $7 million at least for the next couple of years, based off of what we're seeing. And I think that he's answering a lot of those questions. And, you know that teams are out there looking for that final piece to push them over the top. And if you're like a contending team, say like a Colorado or a Dallas, and you see what Brad Marchand has brought to the Florida Panthers, who, yeah, they already won the Stanley Cup last year. They've proven that they can do it without Marchand. But again, like what he's been able to unlock for that third line with those two other guys, Lusterine and Lundell, like that has been their best line of the playoffs. And Brad Marchand is a huge part of that. And, game 2, he comes up huge in a couple big moments and ends up being the difference in that game. Like that could end up being the difference between a Stanley Cup title and a runner-up finish. So teams out there that are looking for the final piece are absolutely going to value that. And I think that based off of what Marchand has done for the Panthers and done for himself and done it outside of Boston where, it looked like maybe he was slowing down a little bit. Well, you remove him from that and it doesn't look like he's slowing down whatsoever. So maybe it's just a product of the circumstances and, him filling a role that's more suited to him at his age right now. Like, I think that he's going to be able to command what he wants in free agency. Teams are going to be willing to give that to him based off of their own desperation to finally get over the hump and find that final piece.
Well, Pete, you've given some great thoughts on, Bruins' new head coach and Stanley Cup Final. Wanted to get your thoughts on something that you posted. It's related to the Stanley Cup Final. You're not afraid to voice your opinion, and it's the Stanley Cup patch. And you were very, opinionated about this. The patch placement has become an affront to the game I love. The cup should be moved for no one. Response.
Listen, I have very strong opinions about jerseys and corporate greed and all that. I really, really don't love the jersey advertisements. And I know that it's a small little patch, but it is a slippery slope. And we're talking about sucking the soul out of something that I think is so pure with these jerseys and these uniforms. And it's like intrinsically part of the brand of like these historic NHL clubs. I don't love selling that off for a handful of extra $1 million per year, especially when this time of the year we're hitting the Stanley Cup Final, and a cool, really, really cool part of it for not only the players, not only the fans, not only our eyeballs, but like the Stanley Cup patch being sewn onto these sweaters as the two final teams standing over the course of a long, grueling NHL season. No, now we have to slap it and absolutely tuck it into a minuscule part of the jersey because you have to really give this real estate to what Auto Nation or whatever it is for the Florida Panthers. I hate it. I hate it so much. It bothers me. It's not only an eyesore. I think it's just part of just kind of sucking the soul out of the game when we gotta keep this thing pure as we can. We love it so much. So
not to be dramatic or anything, right? Don't be dramatic or anything.
It's very dramatic. I know I'm very dramatic, but it just hurts my eyes, man. I hate it.
You said it's like a small patch. It's not the. Go ahead.
In 2 years, we're going to be talking about these European leagues where they're slapping stickers on the front of the helmet. They're putting ads everywhere. It's just such a slippery slope. You give a few inches, they try to take a foot. So it really bothers me knowing where this could go.
Dude, I agree with you, and it's not that small. You're like, oh, I know it's just a small patch. It's huge. It is not that small. So your passion is valid, and we're gonna keep you on a rant since you're kind of going. But what do you think about there was a vote and the not Bruins. I think it is Bruins fan. Adam brought this to my attention. Bruins fans or just Boston fans have been voted the most obnoxious.
Bruins fans, yes.
Bruins fans? Okay.
Action Network, yeah, said the Bruins are the most obnoxious fans in the National Hockey League. 10.5% of the vote.
Okay, yeah. So take that away, Pete.
I would disagree with that, being somebody who deals with 32 fan bases on a daily basis. Maybe it's because Bruins fans are like they're my own, so I don't consider them annoying a lot of the time. Sometimes I do. But to that, my like ultimate genuine reaction is good. Like, yes. I want us to be considered the most obnoxious and the most annoying and in your face. Like, good. Be worse. Be worse. Be kind. Don't be nasty. Don't be like a disgrace. Don't reflect poorly on the logo. but be annoying, be obnoxious, good, be loud, and keep it going. Make sure that it is next year when they do this vote. Make sure it's even more distance between first and second place.
Yeah, bump that up to like 15% rather than 10.5%. Right.
Exactly. Okay, so that's a win. That's a win in your eyes. I like it. I
mean, Sophia, let me ask you this. You know the
Yes.
Toronto fan base well. Are you not going to say that Toronto is more obnoxious and more annoying than the Bruins fan base?
100% yes. 100% they are more annoying and more obnoxious, and it goes in ranges. I think, as you know, the Bruins fans are some of my favorite people on earth because they've embraced me so nicely as a non-Bostonian. So I feel so grateful. But in Toronto, there's like ranges. There's like the corporate a-holes, and then there's there's a lot. There's the people who are not from Toronto but have claim the team. So yes, I would agree they're number one, and I much more enjoyed dealing with these fans over here.
That's what I thought.
That's what I thought. All right, Pete, we're going to end it because I think you got to go, and then we've also got to toss it to break again. But thanks again so much for for being on our show, actually. Thanks for us being on your show.
Welcome.
This is now
You're
your
welcome
show.
for having you.
Good seeing you, buddy.
Yes,
yeah, you as well. Thanks for coming on my show. This has been great.
Okay, we're throwing it to break. I got to reset. We'll see you after these 2 minutes. Welcome back to the Hockey Hub. Just soloing now, you and I, Adam. No more Pete Blackburn. But, dude, we forgot to promote his podcast. He's got a great one, What Chaos. We should have done that while he was online. But What Chaos, Pete Blackburn. Talking all things, of course, the Marco Sturm hiring.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question. How can two of us solo?
You know what? You just heard how I threw it to break. I thanked Pete for having us on his show. So you just got to give me a bit of a runway today.
Fair enough. It's okay.
I feel like I need a little bit more of this.
Yeah, I just couldn't let that one go because it made me chuckle a little bit. I'm not,
No. You're welcome to make fun of me all you want because I'm struggle city today.
The two of us was solo the rest of the way.
Yeah, just two of us soloing the rest of. Well, we're not in the same room. I think that's what it is. I feel alone.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you'll be with us tomorrow, right?
Yes. By the way, I think I was also supposed to promote this. Tomorrow, guys, 11 o'clock, live press conference with new head coach Marco Sturm, 30th in Bruins history. And Nesson, of course, is going to carry that live. We're going to go on before, we're going to go on after, and we are going to have Marco Sturm on. We're not calling it a one-on-one because there will be a full panel, but we're going to get some exclusive time with the new head coach. So be sure to tune in before 11 o'clock to set things up, and then, of course, afterwards. But before then, we will have a very, very exciting game tonight, the third of the Stanley Cup Final. Dude, we were talking about this with Pete. How fun has it been to watch and how intense? It's everything, like you said. You can't really ask for anything more. It's everything you would want in a final, in the Stanley Cup Final.
Yeah, I would agree, too, right? Because I think that, the rest of the country looks at a rematch as like, oh, man, these two teams again. Even though last year's win 7, of course, the Panthers were up 3-0, and we talked to Pete about it earlier. I mean, some of the games were multi-goal games, right? These first 2 games have been just incredible. Like you said, everything you could ask for, an overtime game in Game 1 and then a double overtime game in Game 2. And, the fact that the stars are shining brightly too, right? Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl on that side of things, just lighting it up. I mean, Connor McDavid, and this has been talked about, at length. Just the move he made past Ekblad and Barkov on the assist to Draisaitl was just incredible. He made those guys look like road cones. It was incredible to see what he can do on the ice and just how fast he is. And he's the best player in the world for a reason. So having the best player in the world on the biggest stage, in the National Hockey League, is everything that you can ask for. So it's been a lot of fun to watch. And, obviously the local tie for us too, right? And seeing Brad Marchand and his performance in the Stanley Cup Final. Obviously the 2 goals in Game 2. He had a goal in Game 1 as well. The shorthanded goal, just like vintage Brad Marchand, which is just, makes, it's kind of, you're dealing with a wide range of emotions, right? Because it's like, oh man, you miss the guy so much, and you remember all the great stuff that he did in Boston and how impactful he was on the ice here. But to see, the player, obviously not a team you love in Boston, but just, to see the player succeed, because you do have an emotional attachment, has been fun to watch too. And then obviously the game winner in double overtime. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out in Florida, because, the Panthers have been great on the road, Soph, but they haven't been as good at home. And I think that's why, that win in game 2, not only to be down 2-0 in the series, that would be a hole to climb out of, but the fact that they haven't played as well at home as they have on the road.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think Pete was just saying when he was on earlier that he didn't call the game 2 for Florida a must-win game. But then he went on to say that the longer the series goes, and if we're seeing double, triple overtimes and the wear and tear, getting a win on the road, and same for the Edmonton Oilers, of course, going into Florida now for 2 games is going to be so important. If they go if they go 1 for 1, obviously both teams would like to win both. But if you're going back and forth 1 for 1, it's going to be so helpful in terms of a mental thing as well. Like if the Oilers go down 3-1 in Florida, they came back from 3-0 last year, so who's to say it can't be done? But it feels like just the way how strong these 2 teams are and how exhausting. We'll see if it does go to overtime in the next 2 games. It feels like it's going to be so important to trade off if you're either team and make sure that you get one, not just at home but on the road as well.
I just sent something from our producer. We talked about the Rat King with Brad Marchand.
Yeah.
In Florida, and how they've embraced that. And obviously the rats on the ice in Florida, that's always a thing. And now they have the Rat King. And, they got some pretty cool rally towels, too, that they just dropped. Ooh. Rats rule. I don't know if we're going to be able to show you that. I think we are working on it, but it is pretty cool.
We'll
but it's, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say something to a point you made about Brad Marchand. You're like, oh, hard to like the Florida Panthers, but I guess we're happy for them. That's true, but I almost feel like with this whole storyline and just seeing how loved he is, we knew that he's very lovable, but just the way, how he does his pregame warm up, the bowling pin or whatever, he's just crashing into people, and they're throwing pucks at him before they exit the ice. Not that I've forgotten, you don't forget, but I'm like, I'm just in it. I'm so happy for Brad and watching it that the rivalry right now is tamed for me. I'm not thinking about Sam Bennett. I'm not thinking about things. And I think if it was any other player, I think if it was I love him. I'm glad he's with us. But Morgan Geekie, or if Trent Frederick, let's say, went over to the Panthers instead of the Oilers, I think it would be a different feeling, but because it was our captain, because it is Brad Marchand, because the rivalry with Sam was with Brad, and seeing how he's been embraced, I've kind of completely forgotten about the rivalry for now. I'm not even mad at the Panthers. I'm just happy to see how he's been embraced with the city there.
Yeah, I disagree. I haven't forgotten about the rivalry.
Okay.
Just because I think the last 2 years were just so emotionally damaging, especially, the first year where, you lose in 7 with the best regular season record in NHL history, and last year how things played out too. And the injury to Brad Marchand and the rabbit punch from Sam Bennett. And so, yeah, that hasn't faded away from me. But I can, both things can be true, and I can compartmentalize. I can watch Brad Marchand and root for Brad Marchand, but I could also have this I can feel a certain way about the Florida Panthers. Now, with all that said, I do respect, the fact that the Panthers have been to 3 Stanley Cup Final. I do respect, that the talent that they have on the ice, and, and the team itself. I think, and again, we were talking to Pete earlier just about, Brad Marchand specifically. You love him if he's on your team. You hate him if he's not. Well, I think you hate the Florida Panthers if they're not your team, but you love them if they're your team. And I think that, if you could step outside of that way of thinking for a second and just watch the hockey, you can appreciate the way they play, and you can appreciate how good they are. So with that in mind, let's bring you that towel, that rally towel.
Ooh, okay,
I want to show you. Rats rule.
Damn, hold on.
Look at that.
I'm zooming in over here. What do we have here?
You got the victims in the postseason so far of the Florida Panthers.
Oh.
Yeah, the Leafs, the Lightning, the Canes, right? And then the rat in the middle. So
that's
those are the
mean,
rats.
but I like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
And the rat, right, and Brad Marchand, and how much he's not only has he embraced it, but the fans have embraced him too. Like, and it's kind of crazy to see, how crazy this game can be. When it comes to anything can happen, right? Like nobody thought that Brad Marchand would be in the Florida Panthers at this time last year.
Do you think he's more likable across the league? Because obviously he's one of the most hated players around the league if you're not a Boston Bruins fan, and he has had that reputation when teams are facing the Boston Bruins. But I'm feeling as though, as you guys know, I'm in Toronto right now, so I've been talking to a lot of people who really didn't like him because of what he's, the Leaf killer. I call him the league killer now, not just the Leafs killer. But the people have been coming up to me with more curiosity of being like, is he as great as he actually seems, like off the ice? And of course I say yes, but I think when you're with one franchise and one team for so long, you just have this narrow-minded focus of like, oh, of course Bruins fans like him because he plays for the Boston Bruins. Now he goes to the Florida Panthers. People see what he's doing. People see how he's been embraced by his teammates, how much fun he's having. Maybe they're getting more exposure because he's in a final. His quotes to the media. Like, did you hear him chirp his mom saying she needs a muzzle sometimes? That's likable. Exactly. You're likable. And then you're seeing Florida fans embrace him. Do you think his reputation around the league in terms of fans, not players, has changed a little? Because I feel like it is. Yeah,
that's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that. Maybe it has. Probably not in Toronto, though, I would imagine. I mean, he's still killing them, right? He probably hates them. They probably still hate him. But, I'll say this. Now he has two fan bases that love him, at least, right? The Bruins and the Panthers. So I think that he's widened that net a little bit. But maybe I'll say this, right? And so the Bruins had been to 3 Stanley Cup Finals over the last, 14 years, right? 11 and 13 and 19. And, so it's been 6 years since we've seen Brad Marchand on the biggest stage. And I think, seeing him on the biggest stage, might be something new for some fans, right? So maybe there's a greater appreciation for the player because you're seeing him now and seeing what he has done, and he's always been such a great postseason performer. I mean, 2011 was 14 years ago, man. Like,
exactly.
there's right. So that's a long time ago, and so to see, you have to look at grainy YouTube highlights now to see 2011 Cup Final highlights and what he was able to do, and now you're seeing it live and in person. So I think maybe as a player, people are appreciating him more.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, like you said, 14 years ago, you didn't have the same exposure. I always go back to this point with the league or with anything really, but with Instagram and Twitter. So things are going more viral. Yeah. His quote about his mom is kind of going more viral. You can see, you can follow Katrina, his wife, on Instagram. He's got a beautiful family. And yeah, he's grown up a lot since 2011. So all of that put together, I just think when you stay with one team, your reputation is not clouded, but it's just like, this is just who you are. But then if you're being moved around to a pretty unlikable team, unless you're a Florida Panthers fan, like the Panthers, and you're so well adored, and like I said, you see the interaction, you're kind of second guessing and being like, okay, it's not just Bruins fans or Bruins players that like this guy because he plays for them and represents the crest. He's moved to another team and has been immediately embraced, immediately making an impact. Maybe there's more to this guy than the kind of reputation he had 10 years ago, and I definitely think he's outgrowing it, and I couldn't be more happy for him, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm just trying to think of some precedent, right, in Boston, athletes, and it's kind of funny. I'm just thinking this. It's like, man, Tom Brady, all these years in New England, all that success, goes to Florida and wins a title, and now Brad Marchand, all those years in Boston, all that success, goes to Florida and might win a title. I mean, that's kind of crazy to think about, right?
No, 100%.
But I was thinking about Kevin Garnett too, and what how people perceived him across the league, and when he was with the Minnesota Timberwolves all those years, and he comes to Boston, he wins the title, and I think he was still that type of player though, where you love him if he's on your team, you hate him if he's not. And I don't know if the perception around the league changed for Kevin Garnett, because he meshed so well in Boston with Paul Pierce and Ray Allen. I think it was still like, I hate KG, it was. That's true. So I sort of, but again, it's. It might be different for Brad Marchand. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting question, interesting conversation.
Maybe we'll poll the internet, although I feel like we'll get mostly Bruins answers. But I'll dig into that a little. I have a quick question for you about dynasty teams. Forget other leagues, because winning a championship in other leagues is different than winning a Stanley Cup. But I had this debate a long time ago about the Chicago Blackhawks and the LA Kings back when they were winning. What makes a dynasty team? The Detroit Red Wings back in the day. Things have changed. The leagues have changed. Is 2 back-to-back championships if Florida wins, and then a Stanley Cup Final appearance. Let's not forget. Everyone always forgets the loser, but let's not forget how hard that is to get there. Would Florida be a dynasty team, or is that not enough to give them that title?
I mean, by today's standards, probably. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the fact that, the game, you said the league has changed over the years, and free agency and all those things introduced, right? You're not seeing, the Canadians of back in the day anymore, right? Just like you're not, and I know you said no cross-sport examples, but you're not seeing the Yankees do what they do, year after year after year anymore, or the Celtics back in the day. By today's standards, yeah. I mean, they've been to 3 straight Cup finals, and if they win this one, that's back-to-back. I would say. And again, there might be some changes in the offseason, but they're going to have their core pieces in place and their head coach in place, their goaltender in place. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see any signs of slowing down and being competitive for years to come either.
And for the Oilers, if they were to lose back-to-back finals, especially if it goes to Game 7, I think about they call it the Stanley Cup hangover, obviously, the hangover, the exhaustion, and the emotional roller coaster, which we're on, but maybe of a percentage, just 1 degree to what they're feeling being in it. Losing, do you think if all talent remained the same, would you have it in you to, obviously that's what you're doing, but how hard would it be to dig down deep, as they say, for a 3rd year if you lose in back-to-back finals and the exhaustion?
Extremely hard. I mean, it's going to be hard for the Panthers to get back there next year, obviously, right? Because you're playing well into June in back-to-back years, and in the Panthers' case, 3 years in a row. And the wear and tear that takes on a body. So, and again, but with the Oilers, you still have McDavid, you still have Draisaitl, you still have a great team, but yeah, that's a tough ask, man, and the emotional devastation of losing in back-to-back years, man, that's tough. That's really tough.
100%. Adam, we have a little bit more time left on the show, but we got one more commercial break. So we're going to wrap this conversation. We forgot to say Ryan Nugent-Hopkins for the Edmonton Oilers. We started talking about a preview, then we got into more philosophical questions, which I tend to do that, so sorry. Going a little deep here. But Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, as of now, still a game-time decision for Game 3, undisclosed injury. So we'll have to see this evening if he suits up, takes part in warm-ups, and if he ends up playing, or if Jeff Skinner slots in a spot, as it was in the morning skate and warm-up, not morning skate, but warm-ups and practice the other day. All right, Adam, we're sending it to break. We'll be right back to wrap up the show after this.
Welcome back to the Hockey Hub. Adam and Sophia back with you. And so, you think about Brad Marchand with the Florida Panthers, an opportunity to win the Stanley Cup. It does take you back to another former Bruins captain, Ray Bourque, who, of course, was traded to the Colorado Avalanche in March of 2000. A year later, ends up winning a cup with the Avs. And at that point, Boston was going through a championship drought. But after that, Boston went on a run. And on a recent episode of the Games with Names podcast with Julian Edelman, Ray Bourque told Julian Edelman this.
So I win the cup. My agent calls me, says the mayor's office just called me asking if you'd be willing to bring the cup back to Boston. They want to celebrate you at City Hall. I said, I can't do that. I don't want to embarrass the Bruins. He says, what about if the Bruins sign off on it? So Mike O'Connell's the general manager. So he calls Mike and says, Ray's been asked if he could come back and they want to do something for him at City Hall. He says, yeah, we have no problems with that. So then I come back with the cup, City Hall, 10,000 people are there. It was like crazy. What happened after that? The Patriots win in New Orleans. And then from that point on, Pats win 2 out of 3. The curse is broken with the
Sox.
The Celtics win, the Bruins win, the Patriots keep winning, the Red Sox win again. It all started after the cup came back to Boston.
Let's go.
Yeah, you can look back at that fondly now. But back in the day, it was like, oh man, like this hurts. This hurts a lot. You know, the Bruins were in the Stanley Cup Final drought, and the Celtics hadn't won since '86. The Red Sox hadn't won, since 1918. The Patriots had never won. So yeah, you can look back on that now and smile, but at the time there was no smiling. But to Ray's point, everything turned after that.
I mean, I wasn't around for that, but obviously, as a hockey fan, everyone in the world was watching that to see if Ray would get the Stanley Cup. But I had a chance and the privilege to talk to Ray several times about it, and obviously there is footage. Like, the city turned up for that parade, non-parade, right?
Right. Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
It was a rally. Yeah, it was a rally in City Hall, and there were people there. And, obviously, like we talk about Brad Marchand, right? He's not a Bruin anymore, but he'll always be a Bruin, right? In the hearts of Bruins fans. And so, that many years in Boston, the success, on the ice and, the playoff runs that the Bruins did have with Ray Bourque, yeah, people loved him. And it wasn't his fault that they didn't win, Stanley Cup. So I understand it looking back on it.
Well, I like the clip, and I like the ending, the whole let's go. We'll see what happens in the years to come, guys. Adam, thanks for joining us. What did I say to Pete? Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having us on your show. That's what you said to Pete.
All right, guys. Remember, we're going live from the press from TD Garden with Marco Sturm tomorrow at 11. We'll see you then.